Howdy YouTube, my name is Jeremy and I'm here today to talk to you about vintage Jaguars, more specifically the XJ40 Jaguar. My new channel, Classics Only, is going to focus on very esoteric cars, cars that no one is interested in. And I think that this Jaguar fits that pretty well for a variety of reasons. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the XJ40. We're going to talk a little bit about what to look out for if you're looking for one of these cars. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how this car compares to some of my other cars that I currently own and that I have owned. I'm no stranger to Jaguar. I've had newer ones, I've had older ones. This car actually replaced the Series 3 XJ6 Jaguar, which was one of their most popular, and it was the car that actually saved Jaguar in the 1970s from bankruptcy. So this car had large shoes to fill. The old Series 3 was designed by Pininfarina. It's arguably one of the most beautiful cars on the market still today. No one is interested in them because they, of course, are very difficult to work on, and you can't find anyone who's interested in working on them. I had to get rid of my old one because I couldn't find anyone to work on it. So that's one of the things to think about if you're interested in buying a vintage Jaguar, is make sure that you're either capable of working on it on your own or you have someone that can work on it for you. So this car is an XJ40, which is the name that Jaguar gave to the XJ line from 1988 to 1994. This particular car is a 1994 Sovereign version with the 4-liter 6-cylinder engine. This car later in its life, in 1993 and 1994, actually came in a V12 version. And looking back, I probably would have bought the V12 version if I were to go back and do it, because this car can be a little bit lethargic. I think that where it shines is really on the highway. It's a fantastic highway cruiser, and I was looking for a winter vehicle that could handle very agricultural road type conditions. So roads that had uneven surfaces, roads that were full of potholes, narrow country roads, and I believe that this Jaguar is perfect for that, because I don't think that there is a car in the past that I've driven, or even current modern cars, that ride as well as this Jaguar. The way that this car feels on the road and the way that this car handles, I believe, is a world apart from some of its competitors. When this car came out, one of its biggest competitors was the 126 Mercedes S-Class. And that car actually weighed less than this Jaguar weighs. And when they were originally tested, the interior decibels on this car was quieter than in the 126 Mercedes. So when you look at whether or not these cars are a bargain now, you know, back in 5 years ago, 3 years ago, a 126 Mercedes in a V8 form was a dime a dozen. They were very inexpensive. Now try to go to the market and find a V8 560 SEL Mercedes in good condition. You won't find it because collectors have moved into the market, and I think that collectors that are interested in kind of the nostalgia of the days when cars were actually more mechanical and less frills, less gimmicks, I think are going to be, you know, we're going to see a comeback to those cars. And specifically, I think that this car is a nice example of that, because it's a great mix of modern style and the kind of classic style, and it has some features that make it a little bit modern. But this car certainly, when it came out, did not have a lot of fans. Jaguar sold a lot of them in 1988 and 1989. It had a lot of electrical problems initially, which gave this car a very bad name. So in 1990, the sales of these cars started to decline. And if you remember, in 1990 is when Lexus brought to the market their V8 powered LS400, which really, I think, set a standard above all of the German and English cars at the time, because they were reliable, they were very inexpensive to maintain, and they brought about kind of a shift in what luxury meant back in the late 80s, early 90s. So Jaguar had a lot of issues with these cars, and part of that is because of the ownership structure of Jaguar at the time. In the mid 80s, Jaguar was owned by British Leyland, and going into the late 80s, Ford started pushing a lot of money into Jaguar with hopes to take them over. I know that GM and Ford, they fought for Jaguar in the late 80s, 89, 90, but by 1991, Ford fully owned Jaguar. So, the interesting thing about this car is if you're looking for an XJ40, I would recommend getting the 93 or 94 version. That is because by this time, Jaguar had invested a lot of money in the manufacturing process at Jaguar plants, and they invested a lot of money into some of the components of these cars. As an example, the generation after this XJ40, the X300, this car has the same rear suspension and was built on the same platform as the X300. Because this was such a late car, this one actually came across the assembly line maybe the last 200 cars that were manufactured of the XJ40. So this car got a lot of the updates, and of course it's always good to buy the last of the last because usually the manufacturers have all of the kinks worked out at that particular time. When this Jaguar came out though, they were not super popular because people were not super happy with the square headlamps. The four headlamps on Jaguars had always been a very popular feature. So when they changed them to the more modular headlamps, I don't believe that people were interested. The reason that I got this car is, like I said, I needed a car that I could drive in the winter. And I was looking to spare my Porsche 964 the damaging road hazards of driving in the middle of France. So I think this Jaguar has done a nice job of fitting that bill for the winter. Some of the things to really look out for when you're searching for one of these cars is for rust. So you always want to check on the inside of this fender liner because dust and road grime can accumulate here, and there's a plastic insert which traps the road debris and moisture, and then you'll get rusting in these panels. So rust is one of the really big things to look out for. Another thing is the bulkhead of these cars is also known to rot and rust away. And what happens then is you get water intrusion into the cabin, and then they start smelling pretty badly. So if you're looking for one of these cars, make sure that there's no damp smell, there's no mildew or any moisture in the interior. And like the old Series 3 Jaguars, just because of the way that this roof line was designed, moisture can accumulate under the rear seal here, and when this rear seal fails, you will get rust here. So always look and check for rust along this line. One of the things I always really liked about these Jaguars is the low roof line. It can be a challenge if you're very tall, but I'm about 6 feet tall and I fit pretty nicely in the front and in the back. One of the things I think that sets this car apart from the newer Jaguars is, of course, when you get into a newer Jaguar, they smell like a Honda. All of the plastic on the inside, you don't actually get the really nice feel that you get from these older Jaguars. The leather and the wood is actually pretty unsurpassed. And I don't think that any manufacturer from the day outside of Bentley and Rolls-Royce did such a nice job. As an example, when you look at this wood here, it's actually flipped. So you've got one center piece of wood that's mirrored identical on the same side, which is quite rare and unique, and you certainly don't see that in new Jaguars. The side veneer is actually the same. This car is a double airbag model, and so it has a center console instead of the glove box, which can be a problem for some people. This car has 55,000 original kilometers on it, which is around 30,000 miles. I got this car from Germany from the original owner, and he always had it serviced at Jaguar, even though he didn't drive it very much. Again, you have some people that are very tall, and you will have issues with head clearance in the back here. These headliners always come down as well, even on the newer Jaguar, so that's one thing to look out for. This one is original and shockingly still doing okay. One of the first service items this car had was the trunk struts. So the struts in the trunk usually go bad. You've got a full-size spare tire which stands up here, which is quite rare. But again, this was an original paint car, no accidents. When I got it, of course, it was advertised as, you know, a perfect car. But what has happened since is this car has had about 6,500 euros worth of service. None of that service has been mechanical. The air conditioning compressor needed to be replaced, and all of the all of the suspension components needed to be replaced. All of the bushings, all of the shocks, all of the rubber parts, everything had to be disassembled and then reassembled. So this service cost me, like I said, around 6,500 euros. So it's not the cheapest car to own, and it's also not the you know, it's not for the faint-hearted. I think if you look at it, I probably have more money into the car now than what it's worth. So I would, you know, definitely tell people to be cautious when it comes to how much money you invest into one of these cars. I would also say that, you know, the ownership history and finding one that has some service history would be fantastic. This car, like I said, was serviced at the dealer. So surprisingly, it had zero mechanical or electrical issues to sort. So all of the running gear, the motor, the transmission, everything was perfect. I believe the differential seal was leaking just due to age, so they redid the differential seal. And actually, I think that these cars do pretty well even when the suspension is worn out. So I've driven some other ones that actually seem like they drive pretty well, but when you have one that's fully sorted and the suspension is really tuned in, I think it really makes a difference. And for me, this car, even though I have more money in it than it's worth every penny for me, because I like the way it drives. I like the look of the car. Like I said, not everyone likes it, but I think it's just now getting to a place where it's got that classic look, but it does have some modern features. Heated seats, all of the electrics, the seats, the windows, the sunroof, all of that stuff, standard stuff that cars have these days. This car has, because usually the Sovereign version of this car was their high-spec version. So again, I would buy the V12 version, and I'm tempted. I'm looking on, you know, I look online every now and then to see if there are any available. I know the V12 versions come with their own series of problems, but I think the extra power you get from it may be worth it. Gas mileage is not also great in this car. So like I said, it's a heavy car. Maybe you'll get 20 miles per the gallon, depending on the, you know, how you're driving it, which is not amazing for a car with only 6 cylinders. But I think that the engine is quiet. With the 250 foot-pounds of torque, it pulls nicely on the freeway. Of course, the freeway is where these cars really shine. So if I were you and you're interested in the XJ40, I would certainly go for it. I think one of the things that surprised me when I went out there and I was searching for content about what to look out for in these cars and what to really, what makes a good one versus a bad one, I was shocked to find so many young people, people that my age or even younger, that have a connection to these cars. So whether or not your parents had one back in the day, your friends had one back in the day, everyone seems to kind of have a story. And I really feel like this Jaguar was the last of the true Jaguars. It was the last car that Sir William Lyons had a hand in designing, the original creator of the Jaguar brand. So I think that this car is really, you know, an embodiment of what the Jaguar is from that day. It can be very temperamental, even though this car has not left me, not even one time all winter. And outside of the, you know, the servicing that I had done to it, everything on the car works, and I've been very pleased with it so far. I'm going to hang on to this car, and I'm going to use it through the summer. And as long as it keeps performing in the nice way, I'm going to hang on to it. So look for more content coming up on some specifics about this car versus my old Porsche 964 and we'll talk a little bit about how it compares to some 124 Mercedes that I own, the station wagon, and the convertible version. And look for more esoteric content coming up soon. Thanks for watching.